Right, I'm going to mute myself till we kick off.
Okie dokie. Here we go. So the numbers are increasing. Welcome everyone. I'm watching the participant numbers increase, so I am going to hold off a couple of minutes while everyone starts to arrive. Just gone past 10. Okay, I'll give it a couple of more seconds. They've started to level out, but still some people joining in. Okay. I think we could probably start now, a couple of minutes past 10. So, okay, morning everyone, and thank you for joining the last of our SSAS webinar series. I think, well, I certainly agree that Gemma and Barry, I think, have done an excellent job in the previous two, and this one will be the culmination of that and putting it all in perspective, which is good. Now, I've got a couple of housekeeping pieces to go through. So following the webinar, you're all going to receive a follow-up email, which will have links to the previous webinars. And there's a short survey which will help us on future events, because this SSAS one's proved so popular, we really want to build on this for next year. Any questions during the session, these will be answered at the end. So please use the Q&A option instead of the chat function. And if we run out of time, we will get back to you personally with the answers to your individual questions. Please stay on mute through the session. There'll be a couple of interactive polls to answer as we go through. And as this is the final webinar, it's aimed at trying to bust the myth that SSAS are complicated, onerous, expensive, and something to be avoided if at all possible. Well, in this session, Gemma, with her years of SSAS knowledge and Barry's years of expertise, we're going to bust those myths and hopefully leave you all with a clearer understanding of sort of utilising the powerful investment tool, which retirement and investment solution that SSAS is for business owners and families and company directors. So without further ado, Gemma and Barry, I'll hand over to you guys, and please take it away.
Thanks very much, Charlie. Morning, everybody. So, got to do it. We make every effort to ensure the content of our presentation is accurate, is up to date, reflects current regulation and legislation. However, we are not authorised to give advice. The content is not advice, should not be construed as advice. Furthermore, we cannot accept responsibility for loss that may result from reliance upon the content of this presentation. You have been told. There you go. Learning objectives available with a copy of the slides. So as Charlie said, and just to elaborate, this is the third in a series of 3 webinars based on or focused on SSAS. So as a recap for those of you who saw the previous 2, or for the benefit of those of you who didn't, in the first 2 sessions, we looked at basically the fundamentals. You know, what is a SSAS? What are the requirements for a SSAS? The fact that it's an occupational scheme, there's the requirement to have a sponsoring employer. We considered the retirement options available under a SSAS, the investment options. We did a SIP-SSAS comparison, because often for a client it may be a choice between a SIP or a SSAS. And also in the last session, we looked at a number of financial planning case studies to consider, you know, how, why, and when a SSAS might be useful for a client from a financial planning perspective. This session, we've called it Myth Busting. We thought that was a decent title, but what we've done is we've sort of tried to combine, it's a combination of frequently asked questions, and I suppose I'm even happy to say objections. You know, questions where people aren't sure, but also objections why people think, oh, I'm not comfortable with the SAS. So what we've tried to do is put all that together in what we think is a reasonable sequence, a decent order. As per the previous 2 sessions, for those of you who saw them, I get the easy job because I'm asking the questions. And as per the previous 2 sessions, Gemma does all the heavy lifting because she's answering them. But that's absolutely fine because she's got all the experience, a vast amount of experience in the SAS arena. So the first question we want to deal with, starting at the start really, is this idea that establishing a SAS is much more complicated, and it's much more difficult than just setting up a personal pension or a SIP. And it comes with the added complication that the member has to be a trustee of the scheme as well, which is perhaps a bit onerous and a bit intimidating. Before we get into that question, before I ask Gemma to sort of address that question, we've got a poll question for you. We've got 2 questions coming up for you guys. We'd like you to sort of participate. And the first of them is, and you should see on your screen now, exactly the question on the screen really, establishing a SAS and being a member trustee is complicated and onerous. So from your experience, how would you respond to that? Would you say that that is true, or would you say that that is false? And then we'll see what Gemma thinks.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a few moments just to answer that question. And when we think we've got all the responses, we'll show the responses on the screen. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's not an unreasonable response. Gemma, would you say that's probably as expected?
It is as expected. 72% of you think that it's complicated and onerous, and 28% of you, I'm surprised as many as 28% of you don't are thinking it's not that onerous or complicated, but I presume those people that are in the 28% have actually had experience of working with a good professional trustee with setting up a scheme. So I think, so what I want to do now actually is go on and answer that question, and hopefully I want to dispel that myth for you by just taking you through that process, what the practical aspect of setting a SAS up looks like. So I've got a couple of slides as usual, just to sort of give you the outline and the overview of how we're going to answer the question, and actually what it is to set up an actual SAS itself. So first of all, we'll usually have conversations with you as the advisor. Potentially we might also be involved with conversations with clients on how establishment of a SAS is done, what the process looks like. But there are a couple of forms that we'll ask to be completed. One of these is a scheme questionnaire, and the other form is a member questionnaire. So the scheme questionnaire outlines bits and pieces around the company, the sponsoring employer who's going to be setting up the scheme. We'll ask what the name of the scheme is. There are various tax codes that we need. So it's just basically engaging and finding out information about the company. Similarly, the member questionnaire is going to cover off things like members' names, national insurance numbers, dates of birth, addresses. And we'll use that information then to pick out the points that we need to be able to establish the trust deed and rules documentation, and a second tranche of documentation. So that's stage 1. Stage 2 is around us preparing those documents and then returning them out to you as the advisor for the clients to sit down and sign. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm never quite sure in this day and age, the deed document does actually have to be physically signed and returned to us in the post because it is a trust document, and it has to come back in, and we can't use electronic signatures on that one. So just be aware of the fact that you've got to allow for a couple of extra days, obviously, for the post to come back into us on that side of things. So I suppose when you are thinking about setting up a new, say a new personal pension plan, or even a SIP, that becomes slightly easier in terms of the process, because you can do most of that electronically. But unfortunately, with a SAS, you actually have to make sure that physical documentation is signed. Once those documents come back to us, what we're then able to do is apply for HMRC approval. So we'll check we've got everything we need, and then we'll upload all the information from all the info that we've gathered onto the HMRC site, plug everything in, and that goes off to HMRC. And again, on that side of things, it's a waiting game. We have to wait for HMRC to approve the actual scheme itself. At the moment, I checked earlier this week, and our SSASs are taking around 8 weeks to be approved by HMRC. Which might sound staggering, but actually, just to put that into content, at one stage two years ago, when we were in the middle of COVID, it was taking at least 6 months to get that approval back, obviously from other pressures around HMRC caused by COVID. So you do need to be aware of about that point, and that really is the most time-consuming bit with setting up the SSAS scheme itself. But once we've had approval, we're then able to set up bank accounts, start dealing with any transfers or contributions in, and we're also then able to start the process with regards to a property purchase or a loan back or other investments you're looking to put in the scheme. With regards to things like property purchase and loan back, though, we would have done our prep work, our due diligence work prior to actually the scheme being established. So we'll have tried to have done most of that work so we can get on with being able to do a property purchase, appoint solicitors as soon as possible once that scheme has been approved by HMRC. So I think that part is the practical side of things. There are questions, though, which I know we've gone through in our previous 2 sessions, which clients might be asking you as the advisor, and actually they might come and ask us as well, because sometimes we'll come on to calls and join you in that conversation with clients. So in terms of clients, they might want to know what is involved with being a member trustee. So really, they need to be very, very aware that they are responsible for unanimously deciding what investments are going to sit within the scheme. They need to be aware of regulatory change. But we will make sure, along with any amending rules or documentation that is required within the SSAS's journey, and any updates that need to take place, we will take on that responsibility. So I think that's probably where it's really important to find yourselves a professional trustee, and a good professional trustee who act and help and assist with the member trustees and getting them through their journey of the SSAS. Keeping records, we will do that as the administrator, and we'll also be appointing third-party professionals, so investment advisors, although the decision of where the investments go will be with the members. So I think really that gives you some idea of that role, and as soon as you have a professional trustee in place, that professional trustee is also likely to be the scheme administrator of the scheme. So I think, we've done that to death in that first session. So go back and have a look at that in terms of roles and responsibilities if you want to have a look a bit more at the technical aspects. But by appointing a good professional trustee, it really takes away that burden of responsibility. Okay, it doesn't mean that the member trustees can totally pass everything over to the professional trustee, but it does help make sure that the SSAS is on the right track. It's doing the right thing in terms of all the rules that it needs to abide by.
I think a couple, if I jump in there, Gemma, is we see a lot, don't we, of orphan SSASs, which advisors, I'm sure you'll all come across, where the trustees, the administrators have resigned or not involved in the scheme anymore, and they can be a bit of a pickle, if that's the right word, to get back in order. Isn't that right, Gemma?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably some of when we hit A-Day back in 2006. Professional trustees no longer required for a SSAS. People thought, I'll go off and do this by myself. And actually, I've seen schemes that have come back to me and they've had a good spell of time where they've not had a professional trustee involved, and it does become, you have to start looking at the scheme a bit more. There's more work to do. There's no fluidity in what's happened in that interim period, and consistency. So it is important to have a professional trustee.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, I'd like to slightly reword the question now, with the benefit of that answer. And in the interest of openness and honesty, I think the question is, setting up a SSAS is more complicated and onerous than, for example, getting a personal pension or a SIP. And in the interest of openness and honesty, the answer to that has to be, well, yeah, it is. However, if you've got the support of a professional trustee, professional scheme administrator, and an established firm with the support that you can offer, then it's not prohibitively onerous or complicated. I think we can't pretend it's not more complicated than opening a SIP, can we?
We can't. You're right.
No, but it's not prohibitive.
Yeah.
That's I think that's where.
Yeah,
absolutely. If you've got the key professional people alongside you, then it should be plain sailing.
Yeah,
that's the key thing. Yeah,
ideal. I think natural move on from that, having established the scheme, or looking to establish a scheme. I suppose the next question is fees and charges. It is either a question, can you give me an indication of what the fees and charges are, or it could be interpreted as an objection. SSAS are more expensive than alternatives, aren't they? So, Gemma, I was wondering, in this context of fees and charges then, firstly, whether you're able to just give us an overview of what type of fees or charges might be applicable, and then your comments really on how the charging structure works for the SSAS. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it does come back to, you just rephrased the question that we've had on that, we've popped up on that slide there. When you are comparing SSASs to other products, it can be, quite daunting to extract what the actual fees do look like. If, for example, you've got you're going on a standard platform, for example, you've got a set amount of bips that you pay for, and that's it. When you've got a SSAS, there is usually going to be a fee schedule, and there's going to be lots of fees on that fee schedule, and it can be quite hard to compare and contrast, either with a bog standard pension scheme, personal pension scheme, for example. And actually it can be quite difficult to compare across the SSAS industry as well. So it's not just right, SSAS, everybody's fees are going to look the same. SSAS fees will look different between different providers. Yeah. And also the other thing to be aware of is you need to be conscious of what that provider is actually charging you for as well, because a SSAS provider can also offer different services, and that would be tailored and reflected in their fees. So in terms of what we do here at Talbot and Muir, we try to make it as simple as possible. We've got an establishment fee or a takeover fee, depending on what's happening with the SSAS itself. And we'll set that out once we know the scenario in relation to the particular case that you bring to us. We've then got an annual fee, which we charge every 6 months in arrears. We've got a commercial property fees, and then we've got potentially other property related fees. So we might be confirming to you a fee for if, for example, somebody's got a property that they're looking at, but they're actually looking to do some work on that property. They might be looking to build an extension, do something with it. So we'll make sure that we've quoted that particular fee. We'll also charge for arranging any investments, and mainly that is around the loan back fee. So we have a separate loan back fee, and also we've got fees that are applicable if any of the members are taking benefits as well. The good news really around fees is that fee doesn't have to come from the members or the client's pocket directly. The fee would be invoiced to the sponsoring employer. So it can either be paid from the scheme, or it can be actually paid by the sponsoring employer, which would allow for tax savings if it does come from the employer, because it's a tax deductible expense in terms of corporation tax. So I suppose that's the good news in terms of fees itself. But let me just go on to my next slide, because I've put some costs up, just which are reflective really in terms of what Talbot and Muir do. And the way that I'd like you to sort of think about this, because usually what we're doing is contrasting a SSAS product with potentially either 2 SIP members going out and combining to buy a property purchase, or potentially 2, 3, 4 members. So our annual SIP fee per SIP with somebody with a property is £9.80. So if I could just ask you, when you're looking at this as we're going through it, to think about that, and the fact that 2 members, 3 members, times 2, times 3, and times 4. So in terms of an establishment fee, you're usually looking at £750 to set up a SSAS. That's generally with 2 members. You'll see as we go through to my animations that we put a little bit of an extra amount on if there's more members. Property purchase then would be £800. We've got an environmental report that we'll do, and we'll ask Landmark to do, and they charge £198 for that report. And then we've got a set fixed annual administration fee of £1715 in terms of the actual SSAS fee. Now that SSAS fee doesn't change, and it doesn't go up in terms of the number of extra members that are with the scheme, and it doesn't increase either with property that's involved or the various assets that are involved. So it's a fixed fee in terms of what we offer. So if we just contrast that to 3 members. So 3 members will charge £1,000, but then you can see that those fees, all the other fees, stay exactly the same. Similarly, 4 members will charge an extra £250 for the next member. So that takes you to £1,250 for the setup. And then all the fees stay exactly the same. So if you've got 2 SIPs that you're looking at, I did scribble the figures down. 2 SIPs would be £1,960 per annum, 3 SIPs would be £2,940 per annum, and 4 SIPs would be £3,920 per annum. So you can see economy of scale. SSAS is if you're just looking at fees, SSAS is a good option when you're looking at property, if they can do it, if they can set a SSAS up because they've got a limited company.
And I think the key thing on that, Gemma, isn't it, that we'll look at every SSAS, any potential SSAS, and we will do that comparison for you. And if we think that a SIP is a better solution, or the SSAS is the better solution, that's our role as trustees to advise on that. And we'll do the costings. We'll show the differences between the two and the benefits and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, the other way to look at it as well, just thinking about an annual fee for a pension scheme, is if you've got a 4-member scheme, you're being charged £1,715 for that scheme for 4 members. But actually, if you've got a simpler, an arrangement and it's percentage based, that fee is actually quite powerful. Because I mean, on average, SSASs you're looking at probably 500,000 on average for a SSAS across the board. So divide that by 500k into a percentage. It's pretty low.
Ideal. I mean, that table there, I think, is very illustrative for those who are obviously eligible to establish a SSAS. That SIP versus SSAS on a cost basis. I think that table's really illustrative. I think the previous slide was really important as well, is that the fees that you would charge within a SSAS are broadly equivalent to the type of fees that would be charged within a SIP, what you might call a full SIP, a non-platform SIP. So they're not dissimilar in terms of things that are charged for. I know you mentioned this, Gemma, but I'm going to repeat it because I think it's just so important to bear in mind, is that option for the fees to be invoiced to the employer, so that it's not the member or the member's fund that's being reduced by the fees, and that those fees should be an allowable expense, a deduction from profits. I think that's just quite an important thing to remember. So hopefully that kind of addresses that question, hopefully. So we shall move on. Right, so I think this one's fairly straightforward, although some opportunity to delve into this a bit. What investments are allowable? So again, back to the first session that we did a few weeks ago, SIPs and SSAS are very similar in as self-invested options. They're very similar. So if you want to invest in commercial property, well, then you can. If you want to invest in fixed term deposits, then you can. If you want to invest in gold or something, you can. If you want to invest with a discretionary manager where they have custody of the assets, you can. For me, The headline difference would be loan back, the ability to loan back to the sponsoring employer. And we did a poll on this in the previous sessions. And although it's not a majority reason, most people use a SSAS, I think, for commercial property. I think it's some, if I remember rightly, and you might correct me, I think it's about 10 or 12%. Loan back was one of the reasons for using a SSAS. So, but back over to you though, Gemma. So in terms of investments, broadly the same as a SIP, but how would you differentiate it?
Yeah, I think spot on the loan back. That's probably the first thing that you raise when you're asked that particular question. And then the second point really is the fact that the SSAS is a pooled investment. So if you remember back from our previous session, we talked about the fact that all the assets are pooled. It's not focused on a particular asset for a particular individual within the scheme. Everything is pooled straight across the fund, and each member has then their own share of fund. And really then, you can see from the table we've highlighted in our yellow box here the 2 points that show that SSAS is different to SIP, and the rest is pretty much the same in terms of assets and what's allowable within both of the schemes. It's literally then comes down to individual SIP versus your pooled SSAS.
Ideal.
That one.
Moving on from and sort of building on this idea of the pooled funds. So do you allow earmarking? But before I let you crack on with the answer on that, just firstly, I think not everyone might necessarily know what we mean by earmarking. So if you had, for example, if you had 3 directors, they were each setting up a SIP, each director would have their own SIP, their own pension arrangement, and each investment strategy would be unique to them. So there would be, it'd be quite obvious that SIP A belongs to Director A, and that's his fund, and Director B, Director C, etc. With a SSAS, we create a pooled funds. The directors would typically transfer existing funds in, contributions go in, but it all goes into one pot. That pot is then invested. So in a non-earmarked pooled funds, we don't look into that pool and say, right, that fund there belongs to Director A, and that fixed term deposit belongs to Director B, and that commercial property. What we look at is we say, right, here is a pooled investment, various investments held within it, and each director owns a proportionate share of each of the assets held there. If there was earmarking, you'd be able to look into the SSAS and say, right, that investment, that is ring-fenced or earmarked for that person. That investment is ring-fenced or earmarked for that person. But with a pooled fund, typically there's no earmarking, typically because it's all invested in a single pot and the members have proportionate shares. Over to you, Gemma.
Yeah, so I mean, the really short answer to do you allow earmarking is no, but just to build on that, because I think it's good to appreciate why it's a no. So first of all, we've expressed the fact that the SSAS is there to be a pooled investment. So by its own nature, you're not going to have earmarking, as Barry's just run through. Also, in terms of any earmarking agreement, you'd have to have a side agreement to your SSAS trustees and rules, and that earmarking agreement would express, client A, member A has got, say, 100%. He's 100% earmarked with this particular property. However, what happens if there's a dispute, and we're going to talk about disputes a bit later in the session, but naturally sometimes there are disputes between member trustees. They get to the end, they want to take out some amount for retirement, and somebody disputes the between themselves the members' share of fund. That earmarking order actually, if it was contested, is likely not to stand, because you've got a set of trustees and rules, and trustees and rules usually wins, which, in that set of rules, it clearly says that a SSAS is pooled. So that is really the thinking around it. But at the same time, we do see SSASs that are earmarked. Yes, particular investments get earmarked. So you might have someone with discretionary fund manager. Member A has got a higher risk attitude than member B, and therefore within that portfolio, those funds have been allocated as per risk attitudes, and therefore allocated across to member A and member B. Similarly, as I said, you do see earmarking around properties. So somebody might have 100% allocation to a particular property. And yes, as trustees, we can deal with that and we can accommodate it. But our concern is if there is a dispute in the future, that earmarking won't stand up, basically.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the answer is no, but a very thorough answer and an explanation.
Sorry.
So, no, absolutely. That's great, because just to say yes or no doesn't suffice, does it? That's brilliant. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
The next question again builds on this issue of the pooled fund. And this idea that the pooled fund is an investment fund, it's too complicated to administer or advise on. And the hypothetical scenario that I always think of is, imagine a small family business run by nan and granddad. They've got the son and the stepdaughter working in the business, and the granddaughter's just graduated from university. She's now working in the business. You could have a SSAS which has 5 individuals across 3 generations, different attitudes to risks, different capacities for loss, certainly different retirement age aspirations, etc. And is there an issue dealing or administering that pooled fund? And again, for those of you watching, this is your opportunity to get involved again, because we've got another poll question for you, which will hopefully pop up on the screen imminently. So how confident would you be, or are you, in advising on an investment strategy in a pooled investment fund? So you absolutely confident about it, somewhat confident, or not confident? Again, I'll leave that poll up there for a minute and we'll see what responses we get. Oh,
wow.
Wow, look at that.
There you go. Well, there you go. Couldn't have planned that.
No.
There you go. Excellent. Okay, so we're split pretty evenly. So I think this is, hopefully up to this point, I think we've dealt with nuts and bolts issues. Yeah. This is how you do this. This is how much it costs, etc. I think we're getting into some nuts and bolts issues now around actually the day 2 issues. So Gemma, what's your sort of perspective on this issue?
Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm actually going to pull up one of my favourite slides. So if you're on our last session, I'd confess that this one is the one I like. I love this infographic. So I think I always start to think about SSAS and that pooled arrangement, and it is reflected in this visual here on the right hand side. We've got 5 people who are sat in a pot. They bring their share to the pot, and it all goes into the bucket, if you like. And that is the pooled arrangement. So how complicated does it get? Well, I think you have to sort of look at it almost in layers. So first of all, I think you've got to start to think about, right, SSAS, it's an occupational pension scheme first off. So you've got a limited company involved. So you've got to acknowledge it's not just about individuals and membership of the individuals coming along to that SSAS. You do have to think about it from a company perspective. We've talked about member trustees. So we do also as well have to think about it for each of those individuals involved. And as Barry has said with his example, if you've got a family scheme that you're going to look to set up, first of all, you've got very different ages. The other point really is, again, and I think this is something that's important anyway in planning, is you almost have to think, right, what is that individual's exit strategy? So even if you've got somebody, a young member, you still have to think what their exit strategy is potentially, 40 years down the line. And that's going to differ to your older member. Say you've got somebody who's 60 and who wants to retire in 5 years and take their pot. You have to think about what their strategy is in terms of an exit as well, and everybody in between that. And also you need to start thinking about, right, I've got to think about these exit strategies, but then I've also got to think about the fact that we've got this scheme in place what are the right investments to be held within the scheme. So there is a different way of thinking, but at the same time, you still have that issue. So if you had a family group again, and they were looking at SIPs, you still have to think about their exit strategies if they're involved with property as well. So it'll then come down to the, liquidity issue. So if you've got somebody who is getting to 65, wants to retire in 5 years' time, you've really got to start planning in terms of the fact that how much liquidity have I got in the fund to be able to pay them out to actually retire. So I think if you break everything down in terms of that particular strategy from the start, and the member trustees are actually as well looking at what they've got in front of them, and you're reviewing with them every year. So you're continually reviewing what's going on, what they want to bring to the table in terms of questions around how they might be retiring, or any changes that have happened since your last annual review with them. You can address it, and it doesn't have to be complicated.
I think typically on that, Gemma, if
Yeah.
I may jump in, is you'll see, won't you, in a journey for a SSAS with a company of directors and a family, let's say, the elder members, the liquidity building up for the junior members as they go through, the senior members creating more liquidity within the scheme for them to start taking income and benefits from the scheme. But often when we spoke about the earmarking, I'm sure you've seen it, I've seen it in schemes where if a certain member has a risk profile of 10 and the rest of them a risk profile of 1, that they can transfer partial transfers into their own SIP and invest in that risk profile 10. It's not stopping them moving assets into another pension arrangement if they wanted to pursue their higher risk profile investment strategy. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. It does, there are always options within the SSAS for the individuals as individuals. So collectively, they are looking to make investment decisions collectively, but actually it doesn't stop them from having their own interests and their own almost agenda in terms of what they need to do as individuals. So, there's a layer of individual advice and collective advice to be given and to be looked at.
Can I just quickly jump in on that? Just again, covering this point of, we talked about earmarking before, we've talked about liquidity. So within that pooled SSAS, you've got 5 members in the SSAS. We don't say that, right, Grandad's pot is the cash. However, Grandad's going to draw his benefits from the cash. Yeah. So it's not earmarked for him, but those benefits can be drawn from wherever those benefits need to be drawn from.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in terms then, I think it's good really to explain that each year Talbot & Muir will actually look at the share of fund for each client. So every client gets a statement so they absolutely understand their position and what their share is in that fund. So like Barry says, if there's cash and there's a significant amount of cash, and that is the equivalent to what Grandad's share value is, it doesn't mean that it's his value. Even though if he was to transfer out, you probably would just look to use that cash pot to transfer out. So I think as well, what with regards to an annual review as well, it's good to know that some trustee companies out there will have a trustee meeting option for us to come and partake with the member trustees. So just bear that one in mind. That might be a good option for certain clients who want to sit down and are in that situation. It doesn't, they might not need it every year, but it can be a valuable
service. Yeah, we have that resource, don't we, Gemma, that we will attend trustee meetings each year.
Yeah. So that helps. I think we exhausted that one, because I know we've got some bits that you expand.
I mean, I would sort of just say as well, there's always some element of compromise, isn't there? And it's likely if people are in a SSAS, they've established a SSAS, they've joined a SSAS, this is a pooled or a common fund that they've established for a common purpose. So, and we did our poll questions last time, and that was evidenced because, you know, almost all SSASs that the delegates who'd responded to the queries, it was either established for commercial property purchase or loan back. So that would be a common objective for the members. So, you know, okay, you might have someone in there who's got a risk profile 10 and someone who's got risk profile 1, but they've got a common objective, and that's the overarching issue for them. So there's always some degree of compromise, isn't there? And again, as Charlie alluded to, you know, if someone can afford, they don't have to hold all of their pension wealth in the pooled SSAS. They can have some of their pension wealth in a personal pension or a SIP elsewhere to manage according to their own risk profile. But there's always compromise. What's the most important thing to you? Managing your precise risk profile or this common investment objective? Advisors are dealing with client compromises all the time.
Yeah, that's it.
You know, how much would you like to retire on? 60 grand a year. How much are you prepared to put in your pension? 50 quid a month.
That's
it. Do you know what? There's a compromise. There's always a compromise.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens then? And this is, again, nuts and bolts stuff. This is very much day two issues. I'm kind of interested in hearing from your practical knowledge and experience here. So what happens then when a client perhaps wants to transfer benefits, they want to take benefits, perhaps they die, or, and I'm particularly interested in this one, perhaps if they just fall out with each other.
And this is more popular than you think. Yeah, we come across this a fair amount where the members will have disagreements.
I think you know, out of all of those, the falling out piece is the one that really does cause the most issues and the most headaches in terms of as member trustees and as a group, and also for the professional trustee. Because if you can imagine, if you've got larger groups, you know, 4 or 5 members and everybody's falling out with everybody, it really does cause a massive headache, in not just, you know, for everyone, because what ends up happening normally is that decisions won't get made and you just end up in a stalemate, which is absolutely no good for anybody involved in the scheme at all.
And that's where the importance of those trustee meetings, isn't it, Gemma? That we
absolutely
do, you know, so, each year. Let's have a chat. Let's understand where we are. Where's the scheme growing? Where's it going? What's the liquidity? What's the transfer? What's the assets? What, you know, what's the strategy?
Who wants to retire? Who wants to transfer out? What's your expectations?
If they do, then we do have to remove them from a scheme if everyone's in agreement.
So, I mean, once you know, you do get involved with schemes, and I think the probably the end part of that journey, when you have people who've disagreed and cannot meet any compromise, use that word that Barry used earlier, you end up potentially having to go to you know, some form of mediation, which is, you know, that's going to cost the scheme as well. So actually the member trustees, by not compromising, are probably not doing themselves any favours in terms of their scheme value, because there'll be a cost for that. And it's, you know, I mean, that it depends how everybody's fallen out and how quickly they can resolve whatever issue it is that they have. But that is the sort of the last day piece, actually, in terms of being able to reach that compromise. There will have to be some form of professional mediation involved. But really, like, I don't want to, I mean, that is probably the doom laden side of SSAS. And you don't see many schemes like that, because people do generally talk to each other. They're member trustees. They're usually in business together, or they're related, you know, in a family unit. So you would hope that they can reach those compromises and actually continue to talk to each other. Where we sort of get questions about how do you retire from the SSAS. There's the full suite of options in terms of being able to retire. So you've got the tax-free cash option, you've got your flexi access drawdown options, you could be looking at a UFPLS option, or actually you can actually go off and take an annuity, or you can transfer out and go to a simpler arrangements to facilitate your retirement that way. The key point really is the fact that there will be a share of fund that you're entitled to, and if you've got illiquid assets within the scheme, you need to be able to take your pot. You need to actually physically be able to take cash out, to take tax-free cash, and that cash has to be available within the scheme to actually take. So if everything is tied up within a property, but you hope it isn't, because you hope the planning's been done well, and you have something that you can encash, which means that you don't have to sell a property. But if you are in that situation where you need to take tax-free cash, potentially if the property hasn't got borrowing on it already, you can look to potentially raise some borrowing against that property to then be able to take out the tax-free cash, or a transfer out, enough to cover out a transfer out payment for somebody within the scheme. So I think that's just one to bear in mind. There are options, and it is really it will be specific to somebody's case. You never see a SAS that absolutely mirrors another SAS, so you've got to sort of explore those options. And yeah, so transfers out is the same. You need to have sufficient liquidity to pay a transfer out, but that is possible. And at that point, when somebody retires, or they transfer out, sorry, if they've taken full benefits, so they take the annuity option, they'll be leaving the scheme. And if they're transferring out, they're also leaving the scheme. So they will then be removed as a member trustee to the scheme. If everybody's leaving the scheme, so everybody's transferring out, the scheme then gets wound up, and that means there is no longer a SAS scheme in place. You've all gone off your separate ways. Similarly, with regards to pension credits on divorce, pension debits or credits on divorce, essentially, if that needs to come from the pot needs to come from the SAS fund, I guess you're not going to be bringing an ex-spouse or an ex-partner into the SAS world for them to benefit from the SAS. You are probably going to be looking at a payment out of the scheme to the ex-spouse or partner. And again, if the fund is illiquid because you've got property in there, you can potentially then look to be raising that amount as a mortgage to come in and be paid out, or if it is all of somebody's fund, you would potentially have to then look at selling that property if it's a big amount.
It's just to jump in though.
Yeah.
It's not impossible, is it, to have an ex-spouse become a shadow member, or
not,
indeed to be an internal transfer of credit? Because I mean, very often a divorce can be acrimonious, but it doesn't have to be, does it? You could have a couple that have successfully run a business for years. Personally, their relationship has broken down, but they're going to continue to run the business. I mean, I've come across that.
Yes.
So it could be that the fund remains intact.
Yeah. And then the other one is around outstanding loan backs. So can the loan be called in if the scheme requires liquidity? So yeah, potentially a loan back can actually be called in at any point in time. So yes is the answer. But why? Then again, you sort of need to assess. I think they need to assess as member trustees what the best option is for the scheme at the time, because there could be other options to actually calling in the loan back, or before calling in the loan back. Yeah,
but it's again in the interest of being open and honest about this. These can be challenges, but if it's retirement, we would hope and not always, but we would hope and expect that to be planned, and so that would be a strategy that you would plan for to create the liquidity.
Yeah, usually over that time, if you had the property in there for a certain amount of time, that rent that's been accruing within the SAS is usually invested, into some kind of vehicle, a discretionary mandate, or a model portfolio service, or something of that ilk, and that will have had that growth. So usually, all that cash will have been invested over time, and by the time you get to that point of retirement and transferring benefits, liquidity is usually quite healthy.
If it's unforeseen, then obviously there is the possibility of having to sell things down, but the ability to borrow money is again a really valuable option there as well. So there is a possible get out of jail clause there, and death benefits as well. Of course, since 2015, you know, even a non-dependent could become a member of the scheme through virtue of a beneficiary nominees drawdown. So again, even the unforeseen circumstances should be able to be catered for in most circumstances. And the one that sort of frightens me a little bit is the members falling out with each other irreparably. But again, goes back to the point you've both made, annual reviews. Hopefully no relationship would get so severely dysfunctional between one annual review and the next. And if you know that it's heading that way, you can start to put the plan in before one of them just refuses to answer the phone.
Yeah, and I think having seen schemes like that we've been involved in over the years, it's having that involvement from us as the pension administrator, professional trustee, that we get involved. We have those meetings with the advisors, with the clients, and usually you can level those out and get to some kind of agreement. Usually.
It's worth remembering as well, of course, if you have a SIP that is 80% invested in a commercial property, you've got the same liquidity issues. Yeah. It's the liquidity is not an issue that's unique to a SAS.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. The next question, actually, a sort of similar theme, but actually answers one of the questions that's cropped up in the chat. Is so this is an occupational pension scheme with a sponsoring employer. Well, what happens if something happens to the employer, whether they get sold or whether in fact they go bust? So what happens there?
Yeah. So I mean, if you've had a successful journey with your company and you're fortunate enough to sell it, you've got your SAS, which is been set up by that company. Actually, you don't need to do anything with the SAS apart from make sure that you update your trust deed and rules just to reflect that there's no longer a sponsor and employer involved with the scheme itself. And then what happens is the clauses that were relevant to the sponsor employer, they'll go back to the member trustees in terms of the decision-making powers of the scheme. So it's just let's remove the employer. That's
just remove the link, don't we, Gemma? We'll just remove that link.
Yeah.
This is an important point to remember, isn't it? It's an occupational pension scheme that requires a sponsoring employer at outset.
Yes. Indeed, they weren't. But actually, at the point where everything's been established and set up, if the company sold, it's fine. We can just reflect that in the documentation, and the scheme continues. However, that's the same as well if the scheme goes bust. However, there's some points that you probably want to just take into consideration when you are selling the business itself. So things like any employer contributions that are regularly made to the scheme from the sponsoring employer. There's no sponsoring employer anymore. Those employer contributions can't be made. So if you're selling the company, but actually maybe you think, oh, I want to get a bit more in before I sell, make sure you've used your carry forward allowances. Make sure you've looked at your contribution for that particular year. If the source is to come, you still want that employer contribution to be made within that tax year that you're selling the business. So just remember that point. In terms of loan backs, if there are any outstanding loan backs, they need to be dealt with hopefully before the company is sold. So don't forget, if somebody new is buying that company, they're not going to probably want to be taking on a loan to your pension scheme. So that loan back might have to be repaid as part of the arrangement with regards to the purchaser doesn't want that loan. So you're probably looking to pay that. And then in terms of if there's a property, if there is a continuation and basically your company sold to somebody else, that can still be tenanted by the organisation that takes over and buys your business.
And that's the ideal scenario, isn't it? We've seen in the past, the company gets sold, the new company still is an occupant of that building, and the members are receiving the rental income.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms though, just one other point, if it's in a the company's gone into an administration, again, I just think this is probably where SAS is powerful, and we've probably mentioned it before in another session. If the property is held within the pension scheme, the administrators can't come and after that property. It's a value of your pension scheme and not a value of the business. So really, you know, there isn't an issue in terms of the pension scheme itself when you go into administration, when a company goes into administration. You would obviously, if you've got into administration, there's probably no tenant, or the tenant would leave, so you'd have to find a new tenant. Potentially there's obviously legals around the lease, but solicitors would advise on those. But you are then free, as in terms of the pension member trustees, you're free to go off and market your property to get another tenant in that building to then be paying the rent for the pension scheme.
So, I mean, critically, I think the question in the chat was what happens if the employer goes bust? And if I can summarise that excellent answer, I think it is the scheme can continue. We just remove the employer, or the alternative, as is always the alternative, if the individuals don't want the SSAS anymore, they can always wind up and transfer away. But they don't have to do that, because we can remove the employer from the scheme. We needed the employer at outset. We don't need the employer at some subsequent stage. So
I'm conscious of time, because I know we've got 5 minutes left, and there's one question that I see that keeps popping up that I think we've got to mention, that is regarding this levy. That a few people have mentioned. So we have a comment on that, and Barry, you've been involved, and Gemma, you've been involved. So I think it's important that we cover that, because I see a couple of people raised it.
So there's a question about increasing what's referred to as the general levy. So the levy covers all sorts of administrative, regulatory expenses, and there's an idea that pension schemes should there's a deficit, basically. So should the levy be increased, and at what level? There's a consultation open at the moment, which is basically proposing 3 options, and one of them is suggesting that small schemes should pay 10 grand a year. So it's quite a significant hike. The single most important thing, and the first thing to say, is it is a consultation. So that's the most important thing. So we simply don't know what the outcome of the consultation will be. As a group, we fed back into the consultation. It's just because 3 options have been presented. I know for a fact, from reading various responses to the consultation from various sources, various industry bodies, that other options are being presented. There is a question as to whether SSAS was really intended to be sort of wrapped up in this, because the consultation refers to small schemes, and if I remember the consultation by small schemes, they mean, I think, schemes with less than 10,000 members. I think more typically a SSAS would often be referred to as a micro scheme rather than a small scheme, but that term isn't used within the consultation. So there's no answer to your question. Consultation is open. We're waiting. The consultation will eventually close. That will be considered and discussed, and then the outcome will be announced. So we'll just have to wait and see.
And the thing is, I think we looked at it as well, right? As in you look at small self-administered schemes, less than 11 members being a part of it. A £10,000 levy being a levy, basically you would see the wind up of pretty much most assets that are in the market. So that shows, in a way, it's the baby being caught up with the bathwater.
There is a strong sense of that, isn't there? And it seems like one of the sort of subsidiary motives might be to encourage small schemes to consolidate. And of course, if you really understand anything about the SSAS market, it's unlikely that I'm going to consolidate my SSAS, Barry Foster Limited SSAS, with Gemma's SSAS. Why would I do that? So if that's one of the subsidiary motives, it doesn't really work in the SSAS world. So it'd just be interesting to see what the outcome of the consultation is. The only answer we can give to the question that's popped up in the chat is we don't know. That's the only answer we can give, really.
Yeah, that's fair. What was the next slide?
Well, the next question, I've slightly manipulated this question. We often get it's about loan back, and the fact that you need to secure the loan against some asset. I've manipulated the question because I know, Charlie, you had a little anecdote that you'd quite like to share with us about. We know that we can secure loans against commercial property. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a bricks and mortar building. So just if you've got time.
There was one example I thought I'd raise. It was a great example of a SSAS that we did a few years ago, where it was a well-known cider manufacturer. that had an increase in their order book, and to fulfill that order, they needed to buy a new cider press. And the way that we got the money back into the company was there was plenty of money on the balance sheet within the SSAS. So what we did, we secured the first legal charge over one of the warehouses. It was owned by the company, and used the money from the pension scheme to loan back to the sponsoring employer for them to buy the cider press, which enabled them to fulfill the uplift in order. I think it was Sainsbury's or someone that had put the increase in. But I think it was just a really good example of where the loan back was used from cash within the scheme to enable the employer to buy a new capital equipment to be able to fulfill an order. And I think there's other examples around that, because we always say, don't we, Gemma, to find that security for that loan is sometimes the issue. And we're looking at an asset that's owned by the company or by the directors. And in this instance, it was a warehouse, but it has also been other assets that directors have owned, isn't it, Gemma, that we've used to secure loans against. But I think that was just a really good example of a quick loan back that we did to fulfill an order.
It made me think of a case study we used in the previous session. So the contributions that would have gone into the pension in the first place, presumably wholly and exclusively corporation tax deductible. Then, under either the annual investment allowance or full expensing, and we'll see what the Chancellor says, if anything, about full expensing later, the money that's lent back to the company is invested in plant and machinery, corporation tax deductible. So that contribution has attracted corporation tax relief twice over. So it's a great bit of tax planning, as well as something
there's one question that came
to the business.
There's one question came through there that I think I'll answer, was could the cider press have been used as security for the loan back? Now, a tangible movable asset is what we would say. Now, even though a cider press is a fairly large, significant asset, it still can be up to moved. So therefore, a tangible movable asset would not be classed as a suitable asset to secure a loan against. I remember years ago, there's another funny story. We took over a SSAS, and the security that had been used was a fleet of vehicles. And when we looked to call that loan in, obviously there weren't that many of that fleet of vehicles left. So that's the importance of having a fixed, tangible asset for securing a loan against. Any more questions that we had come through, Barry, that you can see that we could dive on for the last minute or so?
No, I think we've had no questions. Most of the questions have come through on the chat. I'm hoping we've addressed those that have come through on the chat, and that's the last of the sort of myth-busty questions that we had lined up. So
okay, so what we'll do from now is thank you everyone for attending this final session. We'll contact you all and send you an update, and you'll get the links to the previous two presentations as well. And please, we hope we've sort of stirred the hornet's nest, as it were, created lots of questions, and we can hopefully support you going forward in SAS and SIP. Barry is putting up the FCA legislation slides, which you'll all have seen previously. Is based on our understanding of current legislation, including and blah blah blah. So thank you, Barry. Thank you everyone for attending the session, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Gemma. Thanks everyone. Thank you, Paul Clark. Thank you, Mark Cox. Perfect. Are we staying on, chaps, or are we yeah.
Yep.
Are we live, Rachel?
Yeah, I think we're still live. Rachel, are you coming back to join us?
Yep, I will. Yep, I'll just wait for the other attendees to.
Maybe they're waiting to see you, Rachel. That's what it is.
No.
Yeah, the engine running the whole thing.
Mm.
I think maybe those 12 people have left their computer on and gone to
Yeah.
make a coffee.
Yeah, I'm just removing them.
I think that acted as a. I think that was a pretty good summary session, Gemma, to the
Yeah.
previous two.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. Yeah.
I think
so.
it. I think it rounded the whole thing off.
Yeah.
I think it did.
I think
Yeah.
we covered every topic that we wanted to in there, you know, and tried to allay any fears and let people know
but without glossing. I think, you know,
Yeah.
there are some things we say, well, actually, no, setting up a SSAS is a bit more
Correct.
complicated. We're
Yeah.
not going to pretend it isn't, because it bloody well is. You know, simple
Yeah.
as that. But
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
unnecessarily so.
Yes.
So yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
We had
Hopefully
90 log, but about I think we got up to 51 on.
50 something. Yeah.
Yeah. 50
Which I
Yeah,
think was
48 attendees and then
Oh.
us.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that was to be expected. I mean, bearing in mind it's autumn statement day, so a lot of people would have looked in the diary and said, "Oh God, actually." So I was hoping sort of 50 to somewhere between 50 and 60. So we were about there, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it went well. Caitlin joined and she said that it was going really well and she liked the whole open discussion sort of
good.
vibe
Good.
it had.
Good. We do more then, can't we? Build on that.
Yeah.
They do take a little bit, ironically,
It takes
they
more.
take a little bit more thinking
More
about
exhausting.
Yeah, you do. And also you think the things where you do the prep, where we've done those preps, and then when you're actually doing it, you think, oh yeah, I want to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say that. But of course in the prep you don't think of it.
Yeah.
But having a structure, that's the critical bit in it, because you know you can work within the structure that we built. But funnily enough, building a 20 slide, 30 slide presentation, in my view, there's less work involved in that, because you don't have to think about
just go through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that series was pretty effective. We got 48 on, and again, I know I probably shouldn't